Great. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second Fireside Chat. My name is Sam. I'm a clinical research assistant with the Female Athlete Program, and I'm so excited to be sitting here with Laura Moretti Reece, our star clinical nutrition specialist at the Female Athlete Program.
One of them.
I'll read off a little bio for you, Laura. So Laura completed a master's degree in clinical nutrition at New York University's Steinhardt School of Education, Department of Nutrition and Food Studies. She previously worked as the primary nutrition therapist at Columbus Park Collaborative and Appleman Nutrition in New York City before relocating to Boston in 2015 to join the Female Athlete Program and the Sports Medicine Orthopedics team at Boston Children's Hospital. Laura possesses a specialty in sports performance-based nutrition, as well as treating low energy availability, disordered eating, and eating disorders in athletes. Laura has an extensive amount of experience in consulting and collaborating with Olympic and professional athletes, local colleges and universities, as well as professional sport and dance facilities. She is the consulting dietitian for the Boston Ballet Company in schools, U.S. Rowing, and is an instructor at the Institute for Rowing Leadership in Boston. Laura previously served as the co-chair of the International Academy of Eating Disorders Sport and Exercise Special Interest Group, as well as the co-chair of the 2019 Female Athlete Conference. Athletically, Laura is a competitive triathlete and multiple-time Boston Marathon qualifier and finisher. Laura, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's wonderful to be here.
Before we start, just a couple of disclaimers. First of all, thank you so much for being here. This will be a panel to start, and we'll open it up to an unrecorded Q&A at the end. Feel free to submit questions in the chat as well as in the Q&A. Know that by submitting questions, you're giving your permission to have your question be read out loud. Also, when we stop the record button, you can also feel free to ask your questions with your video as well, if you would prefer to do that. Another disclaimer is that there will be no medical advice given during this fireside chat, and all parties are speaking on behalf of themselves. But let's launch into it. So Laura, this is all about getting to know you. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you sort of got to where you are now in the Female Athlete Program?
Sure. How long do I have? So I have kind of an interesting journey. I said when I was growing up, when I was a little girl, I wanted to go in the medical field. I wanted to be a pediatrician, actually. That was kind of like my dream as a kid. I somehow found myself in the finance world, which was not being a pediatrician, obviously. It was pretty different. That was my first degree. So some people know this about me, that I was a career changer. I started, with a degree in economics at Rutgers University, and graduated and worked on Wall Street. So I worked in financial services, worked on a trading floor, and through that realized this is not what I want to be doing. For me, I really was looking for more fulfillment in what I was doing. I wanted to feel like when I left work at the end of the day, I was making a difference in someone's life. And I can honestly say I feel that way in the work I do now. So I decided when I was still working on Wall Street that I wanted to go back to school and become a dietitian. And so for a while I worked part-time in a financial services firm and went to school at night, and then decided to go full-time to school. So it didn't take me 10 years, and ended up working for a practice in New York City, as mentioned in my bio, and then actually met Dr. Ackerman at a eating disorder and sport conference, and had known about her work and had heard about the Female Athlete Program. So I very boldly said to her, I want to move to Boston and I want to work for you. So as we all know, Dr. Ackerman loves a bold, strong woman who could speak up for herself. So I met her at the conference, and 2 years later, we kept in touch, and then I ended up in Boston. So, and I think the rest has sort of been history. I mean, it's been my dream. Like when I went back to school to become a dietitian, I knew I wanted to work in the intersection of eating disorder and sport. And at that time, there were very few people doing this work. I think now we're seeing tons of young dietitians coming through school and really wanting to go into this area. But at that time, it was like, you want to do what? And I got to tell you, how many times I would get the comment, athletes have eating disorders? So we've come a long way, and you know, it was life-changing moving to Boston. So yeah, being a lifelong athlete myself, I was potty trained on literally the side of a soccer field when my brothers were playing. Yeah, it's a dream. So that's kind of my, you know, I told you it was a long answer, but that's sort of how I got to Boston and how I work here now.
Great. So for the viewers that might not be as familiar with your work in both the program and in your private practice, what are you sort of doing on a day-to-day basis? What populations are you serving?
Sure. So I always like to start out by saying I don't just see females. I also see male patients both at Children's and through the private practice. So I do have a group private practice where I have 5 incredible dietitians that all also specialize in sport and eating disorders that work with me there. So in both environments, I'm seeing athletes, all athlete populations. So people that really identify and connect with that. That is a major part of their identity, right? And that could be someone, it could be younger, you know, really I would say my youngest, actually I've had probably as young as about 8 up to the age of, I think my oldest patient was an 80-year-old cyclist. So really I always think it's misleading that, you know, it's Children's, but we see adults obviously at our program at Children's, so or not obviously maybe to some. So within that spectrum of the athletes that we're seeing, pretty much, I mean, there are certainly some performance-based athletes where maybe it's someone's training for a marathon or, you know, any sort of athletic goal, right? And maybe the nutrition feels like, I don't really know what I'm quite doing here. I need a little help. Or maybe with some of our more professional or sort of Olympic hopeful or Olympic athletes, it might be fine tuning their nutrition. So we definitely do some performance-based nutrition, but really sort of like the like meat and potatoes, no pun intended, is like the athletes that are struggling with that piece of low energy availability. So basically not taking in enough calories to support the energy expenditures that you're doing through sport. So, and along with that, it might be because someone, you know, my subspecialty is in treating eating disorders. The practice I worked for in New York City was a boutique eating disorder practice. We did programming, we did meal support. So I really started off in the world of eating disorder nutrition. So really overlaying that with being a sports dietitian, that's kind of what created the career. And that's the work I would say I'm doing the most of on a day-to-day basis. So it's really taking those 2 specialties and working with athletes that then maybe are struggling to meet their energy needs because of a disordered relationship with food, whether it is a clinically diagnosed eating disorder or something that's maybe kind of floating below the clinical diagnosis. But so that's really an enormous passion of mine. So yeah, on the day-to-day basis, I'm seeing, you know, anywhere from 5 to 7 patients a day. And it's counseling, and depending on the age, you know, so much of the work we're doing, it's not just, you know, it's not checking, you know, foods and just, you know, counting numbers. It's a lot of our work. I'm also psychologically trained and did some coursework in Department of Psychology at NYU when I was doing my master's. So I'm able to bring some counseling skills. Obviously, I'm not a therapist. I very much stay in my lane with the work that I do, but definitely I think being an eating disorder clinician, you're going to bring in elements of that, some of that therapeutic work into what you do. So yeah, so there's a lot to it, I would say. I would definitely say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So obviously going into your career as a dietitian, you had this huge career shift and I don't know, I'm sure you've encountered some failures or challenges along the way. Do you have any sort of advice for maybe any aspiring dietitians listening or anybody interested in nutrition at all, and sort of how you sort of came to this point in your career? Yeah,
I mean, I think there's no journey that's without some adversity and some challenges, right? I actually say that to my patients all the time. So, you know, and I think that it's one of my favorite things to say is really like respecting where you are in the process, right? I remember my first boss in New York City, who's still a mentor to me, the dietitian that I worked for there. So much of what she would say to me, I would always try to be like 10 steps ahead of myself, right? So I'm graduating school and I'm like, I want this and I want that and I want that. Like, I was so like, you know, I was here already, but I wasn't being where I was, right? So there was some frustration with like, Laura, you're not there yet, right? So I think my sort of drive and ambition has also been a challenge in learning to sort of rein that in. And something I say, this is very common advice that I give to maybe a dietetic student who's graduating and wants to get into, you know, maybe eating disorder and sport work, right? Which is I've already explained, it's two specialties, right? You're not just a sports dietitian, you're not just an eating disorder clinician. You need to understand both worlds. And I really think the eating disorder knowledge and skill set actually takes a lot more learning and exposure and practice than the sports nutrition, which is a lot more like, I read my book, it's black and white, I took a course. Whereas the eating disorder work is very complex. So my advice to people is always, again, respect where you are in the process. Don't plan on graduating school and being an expert in this, right? So maybe you need to start out by working in an eating disorder treatment facility, or working, you know, in a hospital doing clinical, because actually an advice I got from another dietitian who is a sports RD, when I was living in New York, she said to me, her first job out of school, even though she knew she wanted to do sports nutrition, was working in the intensive care unit at a hospital. But she said, you need to know electrolyte management. You need to know how the body's processing things. There's no better way to learn that than working in an intensive care unit, right? So I think respecting where you are in the process, taking it one step at a time, definitely talking to people. You know, I always did a lot of that, but I think you got to walk before you can run, right? So I think for me, that was always a challenge, right? So having a mentor say to me, like, pull the reins back a little. It's great to have ambition, but again, like, you got to build the foundation, right? If you don't have the foundation, the house is going to crumble, right? So that was something I had to constantly remind myself while I was growing and learning in my own journey.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. So obviously you've sort of specialized at this point into not treating only female athletes, but athletes more generally, and particularly state of flow energy availability. I'm wondering if you can sort of speak to the importance of treating athletes and female athletes and treating these specific conditions.
Yeah. So I guess I've kind of explained the idea of, so would you like me to go through kind of how I actually might approach the case? Okay. So we'll give kind of a classic example that we see a lot, right? If it's let's say the referral initially comes in through Dr. Ackerman, which sometimes an athlete might present with fatigue, might present with amenorrhea, maybe it's a stress fracture. Dr. Ackerman works her magic and gets them into nutrition to see either myself or my wonderful colleague, Nicole Farnsworth. And, you know, I think my first line, the first thing I always want to do when I meet someone, I want to establish trust. So like before I'm diving in and trying to understand what they're eating and trying to understand what they're doing, like I want to build a rapport with someone. Like I feel like I have these tidbits of advice I've gotten throughout my life. And one was from my father, who always said that like relationship building, my father's in business, so a different industry, but my previous industry actually, but had always said to me, like, no matter what you're doing, it's all about like creating that relationship and that trust with a patient. Because especially if I'm going to be working with someone who's struggling with their relationship with food, I'm asking them to trust me with their body, with their relationship with food, right? So having them be able to open up to me is really essential to the success of the work going forward, right? So before I'm even getting into like the real nitty gritty, like I usually try to make someone feel comfortable in the beginning of session, right? I want to know, and I genuinely I approach all my sessions with curiosity because I want to learn about the person I'm working with, right? It's, you know, that having a conversation with someone, and a lot of times you're going to find out a lot of the information that you need to know for the clinical piece through just a conversation with them. Right? So that's another actually piece of advice I give young dietitians when they're starting out, like, be curious. If you were sitting down with someone and you wanted to know about them, you're gonna have a conversation, because I think a lot of dietitians new dietitians go in and sort of like, here's my questions, and like, okay, I need to just ask this. But like if someone says something and you're like, wait a second, you would ask another question, right? So I think learning to just like build that rapport, be curious, and don't make someone feel like they're, you know, on the witness stand or something being questioned. So relationship building. And then obviously, yeah, the clinical workup piece, which is understanding, you know, what does their training schedule look like? So how much energy, and that's a tricky one because energy availability and energy expenditure can be tough to figure out. How hard is someone going? Are we monitoring heart rates? Like, yeah, it could be an hour of working out, but an hour can look a lot of different ways. So, you know, we always say, Nicole and I always say it's both an art and a science. So some of this comes with experience, but trying to understand an athlete's energy expenditure, making sure they're taking rest days, and then understanding how are they fueling? Are they pre and post workout fueling? Are they fueling during a workout if it's necessary? You know, and obviously we also go through full clinical background, food allergies, medications, like we do a full clinical workup as well. And then really it's kind of about putting the pieces together, right? So education is paramount with this as well. So it's really you know, making sure, like, does someone know? There's a lot of, there's one way to say it. There's a lot of crappy information out there when it comes to nutrition. So I love myth busting too. I want to make sure that my athletes understand what I'm explaining to them and that they understand, you know, it's like teach a man to fish, right? So I don't want them just to say like, here's your plan, go ahead. But like the whys are really important to me. So I'm really big on education. And basically if someone's in a low energy state, we want to get the nutrition up. So I think navigating what are their barriers, right? If it's fears around weight gain, or if it's discomfort with fullness, or medications that suppress the appetite. I mean, there can be so many different things. So I think another piece to mention to this is that we also often collaborate 9 times out of 10 with a psychologist on the team as well. So again, it's very important, you know, we have the medical piece, we have the nutrition piece and the therapeutic piece, and that everyone really staying in their lane and doing their work, but communicating, then you're supporting the athlete, right? And sometimes that might involve a coach, it might involve a parent, especially with our younger athletes, but it might involve a physical therapist, a psychiatrist, but really figuring out what that patient needs and supporting them from every angle. So I feel like I could talk for like hours about this, so I'll pause there, but that kind of gives you a little bit of a or a big overview. I don't know. But hopefully some of that was helpful.
No, it was. Thank you. I'm wondering what you would say the most rewarding and the most challenging parts of your role are.
They're probably pretty connected. The rewarding parts, especially like working with athletes, when someone comes to you and says like, I felt awesome. Like I fueled, and Laura, you're not going to believe it, I had the best race of my life. Or like, wow, you were right. Like the food eating is like, it really does make a difference. So I think when someone hits a goal that they have, also there's always a celebratory moment if a female athlete has lost her period, gets it back. I feel like we have like this like party moment. So I think really having someone say like, you know, thank you, because of your support and your help, I was able to, you know, I've had athletes like that have lost their periods and like wanted to get a period back to like get pregnant. And I've watched some of my patients come into me very sick, restricted, underweight, restore their periods, get pregnant, have a baby. So like whatever someone's goal is, seeing them achieve it is like true joy. And I think the challenges are like, especially in the eating disorder population, it's a really, eating disorders are psychiatric illnesses and they're very challenging to treat. So I think a lot of times it's hard. We try not to take our work home with us, but sometimes when a patient's really struggling, and it's sort of like in my mind, you're like, oh, you just need to do this. But like, it's not as easy as that, right? It would be a lot easier to treat. So I think when a patient's struggling, that can be hard, but also when I know I'm maybe recommending something that's beneficial for them and they aren't in a place to hear that, that's really hard because I can't push them beyond what they're ready to do, stage of readiness, right? So I think that's really hard too. And lastly, I would say, like, I think one of the other hard things can be fighting back against like some sport culture. So, right, where like the thin ideal in sport and the lighter is faster myth. So sometimes we're battling coaches making recommendations, or athletes coming in saying, well, no, I can't gain the weight because then I'm going to get slower. So that's another challenge.
Definitely.
Yeah.
For sure. So you have your work and your private practice in the program, and you're also consulting with a lot of organizations and teams. You also had the time to contribute recently to a book called How She Did It.
Yeah.
Please tell us more about this book and what you wrote about.
Sure. So I had the opportunity, another physician that we commonly collaborate with came to me, gosh, I guess it was a while ago now. It's probably like over a year and a half ago. And said, hey, I've been asked to contribute to this book by Sarah Slattery and Molly Huddle. And, they're looking for dietitian, sports dietitian help. Would you be interested? And it was like, I mean, duh, no brainer, right? Like, yeah. So, being a big fan of both of them. So yeah, so that was the invite. And actually I did it. This is kind of funny timing. So actually I wrote it over my maternity leave. When I was pregnant with my daughter, Ellie, that's when I did most of the writing on the How She Did It book. And yeah, it's cool. I mean, it's a really cool book about, they interviewed a lot of collegiate and professional female athletes, but like what was really important to me was that I really wanted, I could definitely write like the science, again, like the nutritional science, but I really wanted to help them convey in the nutrition chapter, some of the cultural issues with sport and around food, and like, again, myth busting. As you'll notice, there's like themes that go through my work that kind of are always tried and true, no matter like who I'm working with. So it was really, really like, it felt really good that when I had conversations with them about the way I practice and what I believe, that they were like, yes, that's what we're looking for. We want you to convey that in the chapter. So that felt really, really good that I would have a platform. And it's nice when you're connected with a professional runner who so many people look up to be able to have this alongside in their book, right? I feel like they've got that sort of street cred sometimes. So it felt like a platform to be able to get more of the message that I preach out there. So it was cool. Yeah, I'm starting to get a lot of like people reaching out to me and like, so cool. I was reading the book and I came across your name. So it's like my 15 minutes of fame right now.
More than 15 minutes.
Yeah, woohoo.
You are also a runner. And the Boston Marathon is fast approaching. I'm sure we might have some runners on the call as well. I would love for you to talk a little bit more about tips you have maybe for marathon fueling, but also just fueling for running or sport in general, and maybe some common fueling mistakes that people make on this race.
Number one, yes, carbs, eat enough. So I do think under fueling is huge. I mean, I think it is a huge issue. So, and particularly I joke about carbohydrates because I think they're so demonized in our culture, but carbohydrates, I think one of the number one lessons to learn, especially for runners and even more so endurance athletes, right? The more aerobic work that you're doing, the more carbs that you need. It's the number one energy source for your body, right? So our body breaks down carbohydrates, creates glucose. And I always say that's the gasoline. That's what really makes your body go. So if you are deficient in those carbohydrates, I'm sure runners have heard the phrase, like the dreaded phrase of any athlete of like hitting the wall, right? Like bonking. That is like, you do not want that to happen. And it's typically pretty preventable, right? So I think making sure that like you're keeping up with overall calorie needs, especially carbohydrates, because I've seen a lot of people when they're running higher volume, appetites can actually be suppressed as a result of exercise. I think a lot of people don't realize that. And sometimes you almost have to like push yourself to eat, even if you don't feel hungry. And I have a lot of tips and tricks. Like I use liquid calories, especially for recovery. So you want to be thinking about, especially when you're running when it's endurance in particular. So when you start getting over that hour mark, I call it the, I swear I should copyright this. Unless someone else did already, but like the workout sandwich, I call it, which is like, what are you doing before you work out? How are you recovering? And then what are you doing during your training? So when you're running and you're running like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, you need to be taking in exogenous carbohydrate during that workout. in order to keep your body fueled, because your carbohydrate stores are going to burn out at around 45 minutes. Okay. So that's when you might, energy gels, chews, simple carbohydrates. You want to be replenishing those. So one tip I always give all of my runners, I spoke with an athlete of mine yesterday that's running the marathon, and I said to her, we've been practicing this, but nothing new on race day or race week generally. But during your race, you want to know, like, there's so many unpredictable variables for those of you that have done endurance sports. So many things can happen out there, right? Not to scare anyone, right? If you're running Boston, but it's an amazing race. I love it. I've done it twice and it's great. So, but you want to know, like, what gels work for me or what energy chews. You want to be practicing those throughout your training. So you don't want to, like, all of a sudden be like, oh, look, or like be at the expo the day before eating like all the food samples. Take the food samples, bring them home, eat them after the race. So I think that good hydration, I'm a big fan of like a 3-day carb load, which just means like you want to dial up your carbohydrates to be about 75% of your calories. So that might mean dropping your protein and your fats down a little bit in order to accommodate for more carbs. Good hydration, but really like eating very regularly throughout the day. Your body needs more fuel. You're burning more energy. You're building muscle. You want to preserve that lean body mass. And if you're noticing that you're starting to get fatigued, or females, if you're losing your periods, that's a red flag that you're not getting in enough. So come see us at the Female Athlete Program. But yeah, those are some of my big tips. I think it hit some of my big ones there.
Yes, definitely. I know you're also interested as well in fueling during pregnancy. I'm wondering if you could also speak to that as well.
Sure. Yes. So pregnancy is a very interesting time for for many reasons. I won't get into all of them today, but something actually new, an area that is being looked at is like REDS, or energy deficit, either during pregnancy, but in the postpartum period too, because you end up getting a lot of women that, like, your body changes a lot when you're pregnant, right? It's part of the beauty of being pregnant, right? You're nourishing this other life. You need to be fueling. And let me tell you, you get hungry when you're pregnant. Like, it is like fuel the beast. But it's, I think that it is important. It can be challenging too, though, because it is important to keep up with your energy needs. What happens through pregnancy, though, is like you start to get fuller a lot quicker as the baby grows, and there's less room for food because you got a kid in there, like, pushing up against your stomach and your organs. So I think sometimes splitting it up and doing more like smaller frequent meals throughout the day can be a really good trick for a lot of pregnant women. So that's what I usually advise my clients, like, especially if you're still working out, thinking about, you might not be able to sit down and eat your whole meal at one time, split it up. And, if you're experiencing nausea or things like that, I mean, I would say take a break. Like, I took several months off from training and exercise when I was nauseous and tired. And I think that's just another key point to make. It's like listening to your body, because you can't push when you're pregnant. Like, you're growing a life, you're nourishing a life. You got to take, everything you're doing is also taking care of the baby. Mm-hmm. So listening to your body. And if, again, like, I'm someone that I love to move. I didn't move for months at a time when I was pregnant, just because I didn't feel well enough to do so. So I also think your exercises might adjust when you're pregnant. It probably will, and that's okay, right? Mm-hmm. That in that postpartum period too, especially if you're breastfeeding, your calorie needs actually really rapidly increase too. Someone compared it to like running 5 to 6 miles a day. So keeping your calories up, keeping your energy up, and like not trying to not obsess about like the weight or the shape. I know that can be hard. And if you feel like you're really struggling with that, there are dietitians, there are also therapists that specialize in helping women through all the changes that the body's experiencing pre and postpartum. So yeah.
That's great.
Yep. Thank you.
I'm sure there are some athletes or coaches on the call. And I'm wondering if you might have any advice for any of them looking for ways to learn more about how to listen to your body, or learn more about sports nutrition, or just find resources or more education about it. Yeah.
I'm not just plugging our program here, but I do think we are sort of an authority on this. I think we have a lot of different clinicians in areas of expertise, and clinicians that are also coaches, and clinicians that have been college athletes or have competed on the national level. So I do think, you know, obviously, like, I'm not just saying this, but we do have our website too, that people can, femaleathleteconference.com. And we do always, we're publishing, you know, or posting on there articles, research that's coming out that we've collaborated on. You know, our conference, I think, is for coaches, for athletes, for parents, for, you know, clinicians, anything. I think it's a great one. You know, there's a great book, Eating Disorder in Sport, by Ron Thompson and Roberta Sherman, who are sort of like the grandmother and grandfather of like eating disorder in sport too. So I think that's a great book that I always recommend to people if they want to learn more about this topic. But yeah, I mean, I do think we're in a time where there are more and more resources coming up. You know, the FASTER project out of Stanford too is starting to really talk about, you know, underfueling and challenging that. So that's another great resource. I'm sure I'm forgetting. I'm probably forgetting some out there, but those are some off the top of my head that I can think of.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those. I'm sure that there are many days where work feels particularly difficult. I'm wondering what sort of inspires you in your work?
So I think to kind of go back to an answer I gave earlier, it's the wins. It really makes it all worth it when you see an athlete, a patient, like, succeed. And again, there might be a lot of struggles before someone feels like they've, you know, moved ahead. And sometimes there's small victories, right? I say to patients all the time, like, small victories or small changes lead to big changes. So I like to celebrate. You know, someone comes in and they're like, oh my God, Laura, I was able to go out to dinner with my friends. I'm like, that's amazing. Like, let's have a moment for that, right? So I do think it's really, like, what's super rewarding is, and what keeps me really going is that celebrating those successes and really seeing people's lives improved and their health improved because of the work that we're doing together. So that's an easy one.
That's great. This is getting to know you. So switching gears a little bit.
Oh boy.
Outside of your work, do you have any hobbies or activities, family that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. So yeah, and I am a big proponent of like, again, boundaries. So trying not to take work home with me, even though that's hard sometimes, but trying to be present. As I mentioned before, I have a 19-and-a-half-month-old daughter, Ellie, who is a joy. And, you know, my husband and I love, like, playing with her. And, like, every night I play with her for, like, at least an hour before she goes to bed. And love taking her to the park. Actually, running is one of my also hobbies. And actually, it's been really cool. I put Ellie in the jogging stroller now. And am I running my, like, fastest pace? No. But is it really cool to have Ellie with me and to be like, goose, and, like, fish and tree and bird. So we stop and we look at the ducks and we look at the, you know, so I think even that, and believe me, there's times where I like to just go out on my own too and just kind of zone out and be just by myself, and I still do that. So that's something. I also, I'm a big fan of self-care. So I love going to get a massage. I love going to a spa. I love getting my nails done. And I really think that for me, that really feels like a good decompression spot. Let's say I love to travel. I'm going to the Bahamas in a few days. So yeah, but I love to go to Europe. My husband and I honeymooned in Greece, and we sailed. So I'm learning how to sail. That's a newer one, but not very good at it yet, but I'm learning. Yeah, so travel, even if it's local, going to the beach. I love to cook. Like, I love nothing more on, like, a Sunday than to be able to, like, get in the kitchen, put some music on, and cook away. So yeah, and reading. I like to read too. I was just asking for everyone listening. I was just asking Sam for book recommendations before we got on their chat today. So I also love reading. I read every day.
A very important question next. Do you have a favorite meal or snack?
Oh, God, I have so many. So let's go. Favorite meal, I'd have to go, definitely, I'm going with the category of Italian food. I would say probably my absolute favorite, and I'm on a kick with it right now too. I just had it the other night. I love eggplant parm. I love it. Like the eggplant, I worship. I love the eggplant. I know people are on different sides of the fence with it, but like a well-made eggplant parm is my happy place. But I love pasta. I adore pasta. Probably followed second by Mediterranean food. So I love feta cheese and all that comes along and the goodness of that Mediterranean cuisine. Favorite snack? Again, so many. But I'm really on a kick right now with banana. Actually, today I had a banana and Nutella, but I also love banana and peanut butter. I think it is the happiest combination in the world. So yeah, banana and peanut butter is a huge favorite, and like any kind of cheese. I worship cheese too. So cheese and crackers is a good one. Yeah.
I think my favorite shirt that you own is the eat pasta, run faster.
Yeah. I should have worn that today. Yeah, eat pasta, run faster. Yes, so I do love my pasta. Yeah.
I realize that we've covered your nutrition work in the program and in your private practice. We haven't yet covered your work consulting with teams.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so that's it's kind of fun, you know, it gets me a little bit outside. It gets, a lot of times, I mean, you're still, these issues I've spoken about today, definitely, I mean, there's no team that doesn't have these issues on it that we talked about today. But it's really kind of fun to do, like with the Boston Ballet, there's some really like nuanced issues that come up with like the dance population, and, you know, fueling a dancer is different than fueling a soccer player. So I really like to sort of, a lot of times with those groups I consult with, like with rowing, I typically travel, I help out the US rowing dietitian. I travel to junior worlds. So like I'm on site. Like the one year when we were in the Czech Republic, I think I made like 400 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. It was just like, I felt like the lunch lady, but I was really solving like on-site issues too. We were in another country. So it was kind of fun because it's sort of it's like a different aspect of the work, which might be, like what products are available, what's safe for athletes to take, even though we're in another country. I've been known to be like running around to different sporting goods stores and trying to use the Google Translate and then trying to find someone local to interpret things. So there's a lot of like on-site kind of stuff that's sort of fun to triage. So that definitely comes up both with the ballet and the travel with US rowing too. So I love it. I also consult for a human performance company, which does a lot of work with first responders and tactical athletes. So fire departments, police departments, FBI, and that's really fun too. It's a different population, but also, you know, their jobs are very physical, and it's nice to be able to give back to that community as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I have one more question for you, and then we'll open it up to the Q&A if any of you have questions on the call.
Love it.
My question is about the pandemic. I'm wondering if you've noticed any change in your patients or clients and how they're presenting or struggling with different things during the pandemic and sort of what you're seeing in your practice.
Nothing, normally. A lot. The pandemic, as we know, it's been hard on everyone, right? Mental health has really taken a hit for everyone. I think everyone, anxiety levels, feeling isolated, like our entire lives were flipped upside down. So I don't think there's one person that can say they didn't experience some sort of negative effect on their mental health going through this. I think definitely in our population, and there's been multiple articles about this, the New York Times has written a few, but the amount of eating disorders and disordered eating that really sprung up during the pandemic was pretty staggering. So I think our patient population, even though we've always seen a lot of eating disorders, I would say the volume and sort of the percentage of patients struggling with eating disorders definitely increased. So I think that the population shifted a bit. I know most eating disorder clinicians and therapists too, still, it's really hard to get in with people because everybody is just inundated. I think people's lives, again, mental health, stress on mental health, people were taken out of not just their sports. Yes, they were taken out of sport, you know, and kind of the way they know it and that interaction, the social interaction with their teams. But it really, like, there was so much isolation and a lot of feelings around that. So I think maybe things that were brewing under the surface came to the surface, but also when you're feeling that much stress and anxiety, maybe depression too, I think it can tend to come out in, you know, coping skills or coping mechanisms, which a lot of times end up leading into eating disorder. So I think we're still working through that. We're still seeing the effects of that for sure.
Have you noticed any difference throughout the course of the pandemic since the very start of it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I would say just the sheer volume of the diagnoses, again, the eating disorder diagnoses really picked up. And we started to see, because a lot of times what happened was when the pandemic started, a lot of our athletes started shifting to these like home exercise programs and having all this time, like, so they were cleaning up their diets or changing their diets. So sometimes there was a little bit of like it took a little bit of time to sort of build. So it got to this place then where maybe 6-8 months into the pandemic, then we started to really see the numbers increase. So, and I think people also got more comfortable with the virtual, like Zoom appointments now, which is like all we're doing right now still, are so much easier than when we first started. People were not as comfortable over the Zoom, and especially like therapeutic sessions where you're having to really like open up and share with someone, was a real challenge in the beginning. I felt it as a clinician too, really a challenge. I love to be in a room with someone. I read body language. You just get an energy when you're sitting next to someone versus over a screen. But I think everybody sort of got used to it. And I found that the sessions just also became more fruitful as people got more comfortable. But I would say the volume of them sort of like, you know, kind of started slow and ramped up.
Definitely. That makes sense. Well, I feel like before we shift to the Q&A, we have to end on a little bit of a happier note.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask, whether it's related to your work or your own athletics or just your general life, do you have one piece of life advice or just advice in general that you would give to the audience? No pressure.
Ooh,
but
good
just
Lord.
one.
Oh my goodness, Sam, just one. I want to make it good. And I think I've got one. And I think this ties back to kind of something I said before, but I talk about this a lot, just in sessions too, but I think it's really like being present, being in the moment, no matter how hard things get, like appreciating what's around you. You know, when we're in the pandemic, it's like, oh, I can't wait till I can do this. I can't wait till I can do this. But like, I also really treasure like some of the time I had so much time at home with like my daughter as she was really little and growing up, with my husband. And I really feel like that time like was special too, as hard as it was to be like, it was really easy to be negative and so focused on what we didn't have, but trying to be focused on where we were and maybe trying to find that silver lining. But I think trying to be present, and again, not getting too far ahead of yourself. I like that one. So I'm going to go with that.
I like that one too. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, I will pause the recording now, but I'll just say thank you, Laura, for being here. We're really excited to answer all of your questions now.